You forgot one thing, Officer Hayes. The sentence was barely louder than a breath, but it cut through the courtroom harder than a gavel strike. A second earlier, the room had belonged to him. Garrett Hayes stood near the defense table in his dark blue uniform, shoulders squared, badge catching the pale morning light from the tall courthouse windows. He had just forced Naomi Brooks back against the paneled courtroom wall, not with chaos, not with any wild movement, but with the cold confidence of a man who believed the room would always choose his version of the truth. The old wooden seal above the judge's bench seemed to stare down at them, gold edges glowing under fluorescent lights. No one moved. Not the assistant district attorney with her pen frozen over a yellow legal pad. Not the bailiff near the side door. Not the 12 jurors who had been told to wait quietly while the judge reviewed a motion. And not Marcus Reed, the 17-year-old black boy sitting at the defense table with both hands wrapped around the edge like it was the only thing keeping him from falling through the floor. Naomi Brooks did not look like the kind of woman who should frighten a courtroom officer. Her navy blazer was modest. Her leather briefcase was worn soft at the corners, and one heel of her shoe made a faint, uneven click whenever she walked too fast. But there was something in her stillness that made people uncomfortable. She did not beg. She did not shout. She did not perform outrage for the room. She simply stood there, breathing steadily, her eyes locked on the small black square clipped to Hayes' chest. The body camera. Hayes leaned closer, lowering his voice enough to pretend it was private, though every word still reached the front row. You people always think a courtroom is a stage. A few eyes dropped. Someone shifted in a seat. The air conditioning hummed overhead, pushing cold air across polished wood and old carpet. But Naomi felt heat rising beneath her collar. Not fear. Memory. Her father's hands on a steering wheel years ago. Blue lights in a rearview mirror. A judge who never looked up long enough to see the man behind the charge. She had learned then that silence could be forced on a person, but it could not be mistaken for surrender. Marcus started to stand. His chair legs scraped softly against the floor, a tiny sound that felt dangerous in the stillness. Naomi turned only her eyes toward him and gave the smallest shake of her head. Sit down, Marcus. Don't give them another excuse. He lowered himself back into the chair, trembling, his school tie twisted under his collar. Hayes smiled like he had won. He thought he had put her in her place. He thought the room would remember his badge before it remembered her name. He thought nobody had noticed the red light blinking beneath the edge of his camera. Then Naomi lifted her chin, calm as sunrise over courthouse steps, and said, "You forgot one thing, Officer Hayes. Federal Review can activate a body camera when witness intimidation has already been reported." The room changed before anyone spoke. Hayes looked down. The little red light was still blinking. For 1 second, Naomi Brooks did not move, and neither did anyone else. The red light on Officer Garrett Hayes' body camera pulsed in the silence like a tiny heartbeat the whole courtroom had suddenly learned to hear. Then the judge's voice came from the bench, low and controlled. "Officer Hayes, step back." Hayes did not step back at first. His eyes remained lowered to the camera, his mouth slightly open, as if he were waiting for the light to disappear and give him back the room. It did not. Naomi slowly straightened her blazer, smoothing the wrinkled lapel with 2 fingers. Her wrist ached where he had held it too tightly, but her face stayed calm. She had spent years teaching herself that calm was not the absence of fear. Calm was what fear looked like when it refused to become useful to someone else. Marcus Reed stared at her from the defense table, his brown eyes wide, his breathing shallow. He looked younger than 17 in that moment, younger than the case file said, younger than the mugshot that had made him look hardened under bad lighting. Naomi remembered seeing him for the first time in the county interview room 3 weeks earlier, sitting across from her in an orange jumpsuit too big for his shoulders, whispering that he had signed something because a man with a badge told him it was the only way he would ever see his mother again. His mother, Tanya Reed, worked double shifts at a grocery store 8 miles from the courthouse. She had arrived that morning still wearing her name tag under her church coat, her hands smelling faintly of cardboard boxes and lemon sanitizer. She sat in the second row now, one palm pressed over her mouth, watching Naomi with the fragile hope of someone who had been disappointed by official rooms too many times. Naomi had not come to this courthouse looking for a confrontation. She had come with a legal motion, 3 witness statements, and a quiet determination to keep Marcus from being swallowed by a system that moved faster when the accused was poor, black, and scared. She knew that courtroom walls could look clean while holding years of unheard pleas. She knew that polished floors could reflect sunlight and still carry the weight of people who had been treated like problems instead of citizens. Officer Hayes had noticed her the moment she passed through security that morning. His gaze had paused on her briefcase, then on her face, then on the small federal visitor badge clipped near her collar. He had smiled without warmth. Not enough to accuse, just enough to warn. Naomi had seen that smile before on men who mistook authority for ownership. Now, under the judge's order, Hayes finally took one slow step away. The courtroom exhaled in pieces. A juror blinked hard. The assistant district attorney set down her pen. The bailiff near the door shifted his weight, suddenly unsure whose side the room was supposed to be on. Naomi looked at Marcus and gave him a small nod, not triumphant, not dramatic, just steady enough to tell him the most important thing. Do not run from the truth when it finally enters the room. Hayes had built his reputation on making people lower their eyes before he ever had to raise his voice. Around the Franklin County Courthouse, most people called him Officer Hayes, but the clerks called him the Wall, not because he protected anyone, but because every complaint seemed to stop when it reached him. He knew which assistant district attorneys liked clean files, which public defenders were too exhausted to fight, which families could not afford private counsel, and which frightened witnesses would sign anything if he stood close enough and sounded certain enough. He was not the highest-ranking man in the building, but power did not always wear the largest title. Sometimes it wore polished shoes, carried a courthouse radio, and learned how to make silence look like procedure. That morning, before the courtroom filled, Hayes had found Marcus Reed in the side corridor near Courtroom 4, standing beside a vending machine with his tie crooked and his hands shaking around a paper cup of water. Naomi had been 10 feet away, reviewing her motion near a marble column, close enough to see Hayes step into the boy's path. She did not hear every word at first. The hallway was busy with footsteps, rolling briefcases, elevator chimes, and the low murmur of families waiting for names to be called. But she saw Marcus's face change. That was what made her close the folder in her hands. Fear had a shape. It pulled the shoulders inward, emptied the eyes, made a child look as if he were trying to disappear inside his own skin. Hayes held out a document with a yellow tab already placed near the signature line. He spoke like a man offering help. "Make this easy on yourself, son." Marcus stared at the page. "My lawyer said not to sign anything." Hayes smiled, slow and thin. "That woman is not the one who decides whether you go home today." Naomi started walking before she had decided to move. Each step clicked across the courthouse floor, clear and measured, and Hayes looked up before she reached them. His expression did not change, but his eyes hardened. Naomi stopped beside Marcus, close enough for the boy to feel that he was no longer alone. "Put the pen down, Marcus," she said. Hayes turned the full weight of his attention on her. "This is a law enforcement matter." Naomi looked at the paper, then at the small black camera clipped to his uniform. The light was dark then, or seemed dark under the hallway glare. "No," she said quietly. "This is witness intimidation dressed as paperwork." A young clerk passing by slowed down, then quickly kept walking. Hayes folded the document back against his chest. "You should be careful throwing words like that around." Naomi did not blink. She had heard warnings dressed as advice since law school, since her first trial, since the day a judge complimented her on being articulate before mispronouncing her name. "And you should be careful asking a minor to sign a statement without counsel present." Marcus swallowed hard. The paper cup in his hand bent under his fingers. Hayes stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough to make the air smaller. "You people come in here thinking rules only matter when they help you." The sentence landed softly, but everyone within 6 feet felt its meaning. Naomi felt Marcus flinch beside her. That was the moment the case stopped being only about one boy's freedom. It became about every quiet hallway where power counted on nobody listening. Naomi did not raise her voice in the corridor, and that seemed to offend Hayes more than anger would have. Anger would have given him something to control, something to label, something to write into a report as disorderly conduct. But Naomi gave him precision. She reached into her worn leather briefcase, pulled out a slim folder with a blue federal seal on the corner, and opened it just enough for him to see the top page. "Marcus Reed is represented counsel," she said. Any supplemental statement obtained without counsel present is inadmissible, and any pressure applied to obtain it becomes evidence. Hayes looked at the folder, then at her face, and his smile faded by one small degree. Around them, the courthouse kept moving, but the space near the vending machine had gone strangely still. A woman holding a toddler paused near the elevator. A deputy clerk pretended to read a schedule posted on the wall. Marcus looked from Naomi to Hayes like he was watching two weather systems collide. "You think a badge makes that paper legal?" Naomi asked softly. "No, ma'am," Marcus whispered. His voice shook, but he put the pen down on the vending machine ledge. The sound was tiny, plastic against metal, yet it carried through the hallway like a decision. Hayes's jaw tightened. "Pick it up," he said. Marcus did not move. Naomi stepped half an inch closer to the boy, not in challenge, but in shelter. He said no. It was only 3 words, but they changed the temperature of the corridor. Hayes turned his head slowly toward her, the courthouse lights reflecting in the polished badge over his chest. "You do not get to give commands in this building." Naomi held his gaze. "I am not giving commands. I am protecting a client." Hayes gave a dry laugh, the kind that invited others to join and punish them if they did not. Nobody laughed. That made him angrier. He leaned closer, voice low enough to sound official and sharp enough to sting. "You people always find a way to make yourselves the victim." Naomi felt Marcus stiffen beside her. She could hear Tanya read somewhere down the hall calling her son's name, her shoes tapping faster across the tile. Naomi knew what came next if she let the moment break loose. Hayes would call for backup. Marcus would react. A simple refusal would become a security incident, and by noon the file would say the boy was aggressive. So Naomi did what she had trained herself to do in rooms built to misunderstand her. She slowed everything down. She lifted both hands slightly, palms visible, and spoke with a calm that made every word impossible to twist. "Officer Hayes, I am documenting this interaction. You are attempting to influence a represented minor witness before a hearing. I am asking you to stop." His eyes flicked toward the people watching, and for the first time, Naomi saw uncertainty pass through him. Not guilt, not regret, only the irritation of a man realizing the hallway had ears. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Tanya Reed hurried out, still in her grocery store coat, her name tag crooked, her face tight with fear. "Marcus," she called. The boy turned toward her, and that small movement was enough for Hayes to seize control of the story. "Courtroom 4, he snapped. "Now." He took the unsigned paper from the ledge and pushed through the double doors ahead of them, already reshaping his face into authority. Naomi placed a steady hand near Marcus's shoulder without touching him. "Stay beside me," she said. As they entered the courtroom, the air changed from hallway noise to ceremonial silence. The judge had not taken the bench yet. Jurors sat waiting. The assistant district attorney looked up from her table. Hayes walked straight to the center aisle, turned, and pointed at Naomi as if she were the problem he had been forced to bring inside. "Your Honor," he announced before the judge was even fully seated, "we have an attorney interfering with court security and a witness statement." Naomi looked at Marcus, then at Tanya, then at the dark little camera on Hayes's chest. She understood then that the trap had moved from the hallway into the room where truth was supposed to matter most. Judge Eleanor Whitcomb had just settled behind the bench when Hayes turned the entire courtroom toward Naomi. He did it with the clean, practiced confidence of a man who had learned that accusation often sounded like proof when spoken from a uniform. "Your Honor," he said, "Ms. Brooks has disrupted a secured witness process and interfered with court safety." The words were polished, almost elegant. Naomi could see how many times he had used that tone to bury something ugly under procedure. The judge looked from Hayes to Naomi, then to Marcus Reed, who stood near the defense table with his mother gripping his sleeve. "Ms. Brooks," Judge Whitcomb said, "is there a reason this is happening before the hearing has begun?" Naomi stepped forward slowly, keeping her hands visible, her voice level. "Yes, Your Honor. Officer Hayes approached my client outside this courtroom and attempted to obtain a supplemental statement without counsel present." A low murmur moved across the gallery like wind under a door. The assistant district attorney, Claire Benson, sat up straighter, her face tightening. Hayes gave a short laugh. "That is not true." Naomi did not look at him. "The statement is on the paper in his hand." Every eye dropped to the folded document Hayes had not realized he was still holding. For a fraction of a second, his fingers tightened around it. Then he slid it behind his clipboard, but the room had already seen enough to wonder. The judge's voice cooled. Officer Hayes placed the document on the clerk's desk. Hayes did not move immediately. That pause changed everything. Authority depends on rhythm. When a command is obeyed too late, people begin to hear the space between the words. Naomi felt Marcus standing behind her, shaking so hard his breath came in uneven pulls. Tanya whispered his name, but he did not answer. He was watching Hayes the way a person watches a locked door after hearing footsteps on the other side. Hayes finally walked to the clerk's desk and set the document down, but as he turned back, his eyes found Naomi with a look so sharp the room seemed to shrink around it. "You are making a mistake," he said. Naomi answered softly, "No, officer. I am making a record." That was when Hayes stopped pretending. Not fully, not enough for someone careless to call it rage, but enough for the mask to slip. His voice dropped. "You think that federal badge makes you special?" The judge leaned forward. "Officer Hayes." But he kept going, because men like Hayes often mistook a warning for permission to finish. "You walk in here with a fancy folder, acting like you know how this courthouse works." "I know exactly how this courthouse works." Naomi felt the weight of the juror's eyes, the assistant district attorney's sudden stillness, the clerk's hand hovering over the keyboard. She could have answered with law. She could have listed the rules he had broken. But Marcus was still trembling, and Naomi knew the wrong spark could burn him instead of the man who lit it. So she said nothing. Hayes stepped toward her, reaching for control in the only language he trusted: proximity, volume, and fear. The bailiff shifted, uncertain. The judge called his name again, firmer this time. Naomi took one careful step back until her shoulder brushed the smooth wooden wall near the jury box. Not trapped, positioned. She could feel the old paneling cool through her blazer. She could smell dust, floor wax, and the faint coffee breath of a room that had been waiting since 8 in the morning. Hayes came close enough to block part of the light. "Last chance," he said. "Stop embarrassing yourself." Naomi looked at the camera on his chest. The little lens stared back, black and silent. Then she looked at Marcus, at Tanya, at the judge, at every person who had turned away in hallways like this one for years. Her voice stayed quiet. "I will not let you turn a child's fear into evidence." The courtroom went completely still. The stillness did not feel empty. It felt alive, stretched thin across every polished surface in the courtroom. Naomi Brooks stood with her shoulder near the wooden wall, her breathing slow enough to count, while Officer Garrett Hayes remained in front of her with the kind of confidence that had started to crack at the edges. The judge had gone silent. The jurors had gone silent. Even the old building seemed to hold its pipes and lights still, as if Franklin County Courthouse had been waiting years for someone to say exactly what Naomi had just said. "I will not let you turn a child's fear into evidence." The words stayed in the air after her voice ended. They did not echo loudly. They settled, quiet and heavy, into places where people usually hid their discomfort. Marcus Reed lowered his eyes to his own hands. They were clenched together on the defense table, brown knuckles pale with pressure, the hands of a boy trying to look like a man because the room had not allowed him to be young. His mother, Tanya, touched the back of his chair with 2 fingers. Not enough to distract him, just enough to remind him he was not alone. Judge Whitcomb removed her glasses and set them beside the case file. The small click of plastic on wood sounded louder than it should have. "Officer Hayes," she said, "you will return to your position by the door." Hayes did not answer right away. His eyes stayed on Naomi, and Naomi saw the calculation moving behind them. He was measuring how far he could go, how much the uniform still bought him, whether the room would protect its own habit of looking away. For a moment, Naomi remembered another courthouse, another wall, another judge who had never looked at her father long enough to notice his work shirt still smelled like diesel and rain from the bus route he had not finished. She had been 12 then, small enough for her feet not to touch the floor of the wooden bench, old enough to understand when a grown man was being reduced to paperwork. Her father had not shouted either. He had simply looked back at her with tired eyes, as if apologizing for letting her see the world too early. Naomi had promised herself that day that if silence ever tried to swallow someone in front of her, she would put her hand against its throat. Now she did not move. She let Hayes feel the weight of everyone watching. The air conditioning pushed a cool draft through the room, lifting the corner of the unsigned statement on the clerk's desk. The page fluttered once, then settled again. Claire Benson, the assistant district attorney, stared at it as if it had become dangerous. The clerk kept one hand near her keyboard, waiting for an instruction she was afraid to miss. In the back row, an older black man in a gray work jacket bowed his head, not in defeat, but in recognition. He had seen this kind of moment before. Many people had. That was why nobody breathed easily. Hayes finally stepped back, but the victory in his posture was gone. Naomi watched his hand brush the front of his uniform, and for the first time, she noticed the tiny red light near the edge of his body camera. It blinked once beneath the glare of the fluorescent ceiling, so small that anyone else might have missed it. Naomi did not miss it. Her pulse shifted, not faster, but deeper. Somewhere far beyond the courtroom walls, in an office with federal monitors and recorded complaints, someone might already be listening. Hayes saw her eyes move. His own dropped toward the camera, then lifted back too quickly. That was when Naomi understood. The truth had not entered the room all at once. It had been standing there quietly the whole time, recording every word. Naomi kept her eyes on the red light just long enough for Hayes to understand that she had seen it. The change in him was small, but it moved through the courtroom like a shadow crossing glass. His shoulders lowered a fraction. His hand came up toward the camera, then stopped halfway, as if touching it would admit the thing he was most afraid of. Judge Whitcomb saw the movement. "Officer Hayes," she said, her voice sharper now, "do not touch that device." Hayes froze. The command landed cleanly, with no room to soften it. Naomi turned from him to the bench, and for the first time since the hearing began, she allowed the room to hear the full truth. "Your Honor, 3 days ago, I filed a protected complaint with the Civil Rights Review Division concerning possible witness coercion in this case. Under the emergency preservation order attached to that complaint, any courthouse body camera assigned to an officer named in the filing may be remotely activated if contact occurs with the protected witness." The assistant district attorney went pale. Claire Benson looked down at the unsigned statement on the clerk's desk, then at Marcus Reed, then at Hayes, as if the entire case had rearranged itself in front of her. The judge leaned forward slowly. "Ms. Brooks, are you saying this interaction has been recorded?" Naomi did not rush the answer. She wanted every word to have its own weight. "Yes, Your Honor. And if the connection worked as ordered, it has also been transmitted to federal review." A sound moved through the gallery, not loud enough to be a gasp, not soft enough to ignore. Hayes shook his head once. "That is impossible." Naomi looked at him then, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the exhausted calm of someone who had warned him more than once. "No, Officer Hayes. What is impossible is asking a child to sign a statement without counsel, then expecting the world to keep calling it justice." Judge Whitcomb turned to the clerk. "Contact court technology. Now." The clerk's fingers flew across the keyboard. The silence that followed felt different from all the silences before it. This one had movement inside it. Wires, servers, timestamps, archived footage, quiet machines doing what frightened people could not always do. They were remembering. Hayes tried to speak, but the judge lifted one hand. Not another word. Marcus stared at Naomi as if he were seeing her clearly for the first time, not just as his lawyer, but as someone who had walked into the trap before him and left a light burning behind her. Tanya Reed began to cry without making a sound. She pressed both hands together near her lips, her grocery store name tag trembling against her coat. Then the clerk turned her monitor toward the bench, her face drained of color. "Your Honor," she said, "the feed is confirmed. It began in the second-floor corridor at 9:37 this morning." Claire Benson closed her eyes. That was before the hearing. Before the accusation, before Hayes had marched into the courtroom pretending to protect order. The judge looked at the screen, and the room watched her expression change from concern to disbelief to something colder than anger. "Play the audio," she said. A click came from the speakers. First came the hallway noise, elevator bells, rolling briefcases, distant voices. Then Hayes's voice filled the courtroom, clear and unmistakable. "Make this easy on yourself, son." Marcus lowered his head. The recording continued. "That woman is not the one who decides whether you go home today." Naomi did not look away from Hayes while his own words returned to him. He stood beneath the seal of the court with nothing left to hide behind but the uniform that had recorded him. The recording did not shout. That was what made it impossible to escape. It played in the same ordinary tone Hayes had used in the hallway, the tone of a man who expected his words to vanish into courthouse noise. "Make this easy on yourself, son." Then Marcus's voice followed, thin and uncertain. "My lawyer said not to sign anything." The courtroom listened as if every speaker had become a witness stand. Hayes stood rigid near the center aisle, his face losing color in slow degrees. Naomi kept her hands folded in front of her, not because she felt calm, but because she knew the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge wanted him humiliated. Justice wanted the truth preserved so Marcus Reed would never have to carry a lie into a prison cell. The audio continued. Hayes's voice came again, lower this time. "That woman is not the one who decides whether you go home today." Tanya Reed made a small broken sound and reached for her son. Marcus did not move at first. Then his shoulders folded toward her touch as though the recording had given him permission to be 17 again. Claire Benson stood slowly from the prosecution table. Her chair moved back with a soft scrape that cut through the room. She looked at Judge Whitcomb, then at Naomi. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "The state requests an immediate recess and a review of all statements attributed to Mr. Reed." Naomi watched the words reach Marcus. His eyes lifted, wet but focused. For the first time that morning, hope did not look like a fantasy. It looked like a door opening only an inch, but opening. Judge Whitcomb nodded once. "Granted." Then she turned to Hayes. "Officer Garrett Hayes, you are relieved from courtroom duty pending formal investigation. You will surrender your courthouse access card and department radio to Lieutenant Miller immediately." A younger officer near the side door stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable. Lieutenant Miller had been quiet all morning, a tall white man with tired eyes and silver at his temples. He approached Hayes with the sadness of someone who had suspected a thing for too long and still hated seeing it proven. Hayes looked at him as though loyalty should have arrived before law. It did not. Miller held out his hand. "Access card and radio, Garrett." The room did not cheer. No one clapped. The absence of noise felt more severe than applause ever could. Hayes removed the card from his belt and placed the radio into Miller's palm. His fingers lingered for a second, as if the plastic and metal contained the last shape of who he thought he was. Judge Whitcomb's voice remained steady. "The body camera will be preserved as evidence. The unsigned document will be sealed. And Ms. Brooks, your complaint and emergency order will be entered into the record." Naomi inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Honor." Hayes turned toward her then, and for a moment she saw not regret, but disbelief. He still could not understand how the room had stopped belonging to him. Naomi did not give him the anger he seemed to expect. She simply said, "You did not lose your career because I spoke. You lost it because you believed no one like me would ever be heard." The words struck quietly, and that made them stay. Hayes looked away first. Marcus rose from his chair, but Naomi gently lifted one hand, asking him to wait. There would be time for relief later. There would be time to call family, to breathe outside, to stand under open sky. But right now, the record mattered. The truth had finally entered the courtroom, and Naomi intended to make sure it did not leave alone. By the time Judge Whitcomb ordered the recess, the light outside the courthouse had changed from sharp morning white to the softer gold of late afternoon. The room emptied slowly, not with the restless noise people usually made after a hearing, but with careful footsteps and lowered voices, as if everyone understood they had witnessed something that could not be folded neatly back into routine. Claire Benson gathered the state's folders without looking at the unsigned statement. Lieutenant Miller escorted Hayes through the side door, not hurried, not dramatic, just final. The access card was gone from his belt. The radio was gone from his shoulder. The badge on his chest remained for the moment, but it no longer seemed to shine. It looked like metal waiting for a decision. Naomi watched only long enough to make sure the evidence bag was sealed, the recording was logged, and Marcus Reed's file had been marked for immediate review. Then she turned back to the boy and his mother. Tanya stood first. She tried to speak, but her mouth trembled and no words came out. Naomi reached for the folded tissue on the defense table and handed it to her, without making the moment heavy. Tanya took it, pressed it to her eyes, and whispered, "You stayed." Naomi looked at Marcus, who was still sitting with both hands flat on the table, staring at the place where the document had been. So did he, she said. Marcus swallowed, then looked up. I almost signed it. His voice cracked on the last word. Naomi sat beside him, close enough that he did not have to raise his voice for the room to hear him. Almost as not the same as done. He nodded, but the guilt in his face did not leave. Naomi had seen that look before in young people who blamed themselves for being frightened by power. She wanted to tell him fear was not weakness, that adults had designed entire rooms to make boys like him feel alone, but she knew he did not need a speech. He needed proof. So she slid a blank legal pad toward him and placed a pen beside it. When you are ready, we write the truth in your words. Not his. Marcus touched the pen but did not pick it up yet. Outside, rain had passed through while they were inside. The courthouse steps glistened when Naomi finally walked out with Marcus and Tanya. Water gathered in shallow lines along the stone, reflecting the American flag, the streetlights, and the slow traffic moving past the square. Reporters waited near the curb, but Naomi guided Marcus the other way, down the side steps where fewer cameras could reach him. The air smelled like wet concrete and cut grass from the courthouse lawn. Marcus stopped halfway down and looked back at the building. Were you scared? He asked. Naomi followed his gaze to the tall columns, the sealed doors, the windows glowing like tired eyes. For a moment, she thought of her father, of Diesel on his work shirt, of the bench where her feet had not reached the floor, of every silence she had carried until it became a voice. Then she looked at Marcus. Yes, she said, but I was more scared of letting them teach you that your truth did not matter. He held that answer quietly. Tanya reached for his hand, and this time he let her take it. Across the street, a patrol car pulled away from the curb without sirens, its tires whispering over rain-dark pavement. Naomi did not watch it go. She opened her briefcase, checked that Marcus's file was dry, and tucked the blank legal pad safely inside. The wind moved through the courthouse flags, soft and steady. No one applauded. No one needed to. Marcus walked down the last step with his mother beside him and Naomi just behind them, her uneven heel clicking once against the stone. For the first time all day, the sound did not feel like warning. It felt like a door opening.